Narayana namaskrityam naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam mudirayet. Shrinvatam swakatha krishnah punyashravana kirtanah hidayantah stiho badrani vidunoti suhritsatam nashta prayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naistiki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we are now on to the second canto, but there is some reference of the first canto that we would like to speak about, and then we would also speak on the second canto in continuation. One of the most important things that we also learn from the second canto is that it begins with, in certain ways, touching upon a very crucial verse. And the crucial verse is Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya is being spoken as a mantra before the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And the Vasudevaya here represents two elements. One is that it represents Krishna, the son of Vasudeva. It also represents what we would call the Vasudeva platform. So what does it mean? It essentially means that it also refers to the absolute consideration. Now, it is very important for us to understand that when we do talk about the Bhagavad Gita, and we're bringing in Bhagavad Gita because the Bhagavad Gita has verses which allow us to approach Srimad Bhagavatam. I was giving a class last week here in Vrindavan, and I was just talking about the fact that Krishna in his literary form, literally, when we talk about Srimad Bhagavatam, we are talking about Krishna, because there's no difference between Krishna and Srimad Bhagavatam. There really isn't any difference. So as a consideration, when there isn't any difference between Krishna and Srimad Bhagavatam, the best way to approach Srimad Bhagavatam is for us to understand how to approach Krishna. How to approach Krishna is delineated in the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita teaches us the way of approaching Krishna. So we have several verses, and the entire conversation between Arjuna and Krishna was about how Arjuna could relate to and come closer to Krishna. It was all about how Arjuna could serve. When we use the word service, one has to come to an understanding that before we can serve, there are preconditions. The first condition for service is we have to be loving the person whom we serve. Once we love the person whom we serve, it allows us to surrender, because you can't surrender without love. And this in turn would allow us to serve. So Krishna also says this in the Bhagavad Gita. He talks about 18.65, Manmanabo Madbhakto Madhya Jivam Namaskuru. 18.65 in the Bhagavad Gita literally is a statement about falling in love with Krishna. Krishna says you have to fall in love with me. The subsequent verse, Krishna talks about the fact of surrender. Sarvadharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraj. So first there has to be love, and then there can be surrender. Service follows after these two factors are met. So we were talking about the whole concept of sadhana bhakti is to train us to develop the identity of being able to serve Krishna, to become a servant of Krishna. And the preconditions for proper service is prema, love, and surrender. And surrender is absolutely necessary, because if you do not in reality focus on the necessities and the senses of the master, how could you serve? Those devotees who are servants of Srila Prabhupada had specific experiences while traveling with him. One of the experiences was, it was overwhelming because they could very easily become completely overwhelmed in a matter of, a week or so. And Srila Prabhupada would just go on and on and on, while the servants themselves would become exhausted. And the reason why this is true is because when the spiritual master is resting, the servant has to rest. When the spiritual master is awake, the servant has to be awake. And he practically has to coordinate all his activities around the needs of the spiritual master. In some cases, when the servant is about to rest, that is when Srila Prabhupada would want them for service. As a consequence, they wouldn't be able to rest. So it was very exhausting for personal servants of Srila Prabhupada and for any spiritual master, because they would just move on and on and on, and you will have to reorient your schedule and fix yourself to be able to serve the spiritual master wonderfully. In other words, the servant will have to mold their life. The servant, the das and the dasis, in other words, the whole idea of being Krishna das and Krishna dasi, is to mold our lives in such a way that we are perfect servants. Perfect service requires surrender, because we have to surrender to the will of the Guru. We have to surrender to the will of the Master. When we surrender to the will of the Master, that allows us to practically have no other agenda during the day other than wanting to serve. The difficulty that all of us face has a lot to do with having to fit in Krishna, the spiritual master as well, into the agenda that we have already decided upon over a period of time. So that's the difficulty and the challenge of sadhana bhakti, is slowly, steadily, we are reprioritizing, we are pushing things out that we deem as being unnecessary, we are pushing things out that we deem as being less useful, and we're reprioritizing and taking inventory of life all the time so that we could reach a conclusion that this is what my life should be, and this is where I can really maximize the potential of being able to offer service. This is very critical for us to understand, is that there has to be love, then surrender comes after love. If there's fear and vulnerability, a feeling of vulnerability, then there cannot be proper surrender. There cannot be proper service. Service requires surrender. Service requires establishing one single identity. Service requires establishing the identity of being a servant of Krishna singularly, which is what Krishna was demanding. He was saying, Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja. He says you can't really have multiple identities fighting for time when you are trying to serve me. This is absolutely well experienced by pujaris who sometimes have to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning. If you have multiple pujari service in one of our temples, where you have to make bhoga and also serve the deities and be prepared for each and every arati and for different offerings, you literally are in your feet from 2 o'clock in the morning till 8 in the night, 10 in the night. I sometimes would have given you the story of Mother Hladini. She was a Prabhupada disciple, and she was serving in New Vrindavan. There weren't many devotees around. She used to be practically one devotee who used to take care of the deities of Jagannath, Baldev, Subhadra. And when she was taking care of them, it was overwhelming, because all offerings, all kinds of dishes, everything has to be made by the pujari. She has to be ready for the arati. She has to prepare everything in advance. So you have to start at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you have 9 o'clock in the night. You just have no room, because you're practically surrendered to the desires and the time of the deity. This is experienced by pujaris. It is experienced by servants of the spiritual master, especially, Shrutakirti Prabhu, Hari Sauri Prabhu. These are all personalities who have served Srila Prabhupada as personal servants. And I think some of them have written books you could also read about in the Leelamrita, where Srila Prabhupada had an extraordinary schedule, and that schedule had to be coped with by the servant. Sometimes Shrutakirti Prabhu talks about sleeping under the cot of Srila Prabhupada, because in Vrindavan, the mosquito net used to flow all the way to the floor. He would sleep under, and Srila Prabhupada would be on top of the cot. And then so this way he could make himself available for Srila Prabhupada whenever Srila Prabhupada wanted him, because in Vrindavan, he would have wanted him to wake up, he would want some help going to the restroom, etc. The point I'm trying to make is you can't really serve without surrender. And surrender requires reprioritizing every identity and focusing on a singular identity of being a servant. When we do that effectively, and we are trying to manage all these, effectively reprioritizing our lives, then slowly, steadily, we are actually acting out of love, and we are slowly, steadily having the ability to serve, because proper service can't come without surrender. Now, why are we saying all of this when we begin Canto 2 of Srimad Bhagavatam. In Canto 2 of Srimad Bhagavatam, the consideration which is being spoken of, the first verse here is Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We started out by saying, yes, Vasudeva, is the son of Vasudeva, Krishna himself, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we are addressing Krishna in his direct name. We're also addressing the platform, which is called the Vasudeva platform. The Vasudeva platform is where the consideration is absolute. Bhagavatam's introduction begins with a difference between the absolute consideration and relative consideration. When we talk about the consideration is absolute, we're talking about the fact that the Bhagavatam is special because here Krishna is being dealt with as the absolute truth. He is not being dealt with as the creator. He is not being dealt with as the maintainer. He is not being dealt with as the destroyer. So you cannot really classify someone or talk about God as absolute when you are putting him into one single function such as creation, maintenance, destruction. We cannot really do that. You can't really talk about the various, I would say, expansions of the Lord, the Purusha avatars who come and then where they basically maintain the universe. They basically are the source of the potency of Lord Brahma. They are the source of Lord Shiva. You can't really talk about all of that as the absolute consideration. Different Puranas talk about these different avatars, different expansions. There they're talking about God. Srimad Bhagavatam is talking about the absolute truth. When we talk about the absolute truth, we are literally talking about the fact that it is all-inclusive. What is the meaning of all-inclusive? The all-inclusive platform means that everything is contained within the subject matter of one person. Everything is contained within the subject matter of one person. Krishna is called Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. That's in the first canto. That is the Paribhasha Sutra of the Bhagavatam. Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, where there really isn't an origin for Krishna. Krishna is Bhagavan himself. Every other avatar has emanated from Krishna. He is the avatari. He is the origin of every other avatar. This is being spoken of in the first canto. What does it mean? It means it's the absolute consideration. Krishna is the origin. There isn't an origin to Krishna. Krishna is the summum bonum. He is the absolute truth. This is one way of understanding the word absolute truth and distinguishing the word absolute truth from God. God can be the maintainer, creator, destroyer. But God himself cannot be the absolute truth if he is got an origin beyond himself. When we talk about the delineation of Vishnu avatars, then we are talking about an origin. Krishna is the first. Balaram is the second. Everything else happens after Balaram, isn't it? So in that sense, Krishna is the summum bonum. So this is one understanding of the word absolute truth. This is one understanding of the word absolute consideration. This absolute consideration, absolute truth, the scope of understanding the absolute truth is being presented in Srimad Bhagavatam. This is also called the Vasudeva platform. Understanding the Srimad Bhagavatam requires one to be in a position to understand and perceive the absolute truth. That is called the Vasudeva platform. Yeah? Because that is basically all inclusive. So we could use this Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, addressing Krishna, the person, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It also addresses the Vasudeva platform, which practically talks about the absolute truth being the summum bonum and the origin of the rest. And why do we also talk about it in a different consideration? The different consideration, for example, for addressing this as absolute and the summum bonum has to do with rasa. Rasa essentially is relationship, the taste in a relationship. The nectar of devotion, which is Srila Prabhupada's commentary and summary of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, talks about the taste of the mango. The mango is considered to be very special. There are different types of mangoes. The mango has what we would call the juice, the rasa. So it's very different. It distinguishes itself through the rasa, or the taste of the mango distinguishes itself from others. So in that sense, Krishna himself is also the ocean, Akila Rasamrita Sindhu. He's practically Akila Rasamrita Sindhu. He is basically the summum bonum, not only in the matter of being the origin of all avatars, he is also the origin of all rasa and all relationships. So when we talk about Srimad Bhagavatam being the sum total and the essence and the, I would say, the peak or contribution of Srila Vyasadeva, after he had done everything, this was his final realization, then we literally are talking about the origin of everything. So Srimad Bhagavatam is the origin of everything because it does not deal with the subject of God. It deals with the subject of summum bonum. It deals with the subject of the subject matter of absolute truth, the absolute consideration. When you use the word absolute truth, it means that there isn't anything beyond that. And for nothing to be beyond that, the person whom you're talking about should be the origin of all avatars. Summum bonum, avatari. Krishna is the origin of all avatars. That is being established in Srimad Bhagavatam. And this is a book, or rather the series of scripture dedicated to Krishna. This is basically non-different from Krishna. Now, the second point we want to make is that it also has to do with rasa. He is Akila Rasamrita Sindhu. He's practically the personality who is the origin of every type of relationship. Where is this found? This is found specifically in the land of Vrindavan. In Vrindavan, the four mellows which have been taught to us as specifically the four mellows is what we pursue in our movement through our sadhana. We pursue Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, and Madhurya. These are the four mellows or rasas of relationship. These are the four tastes of coming in touch with Krishna. These are four different tastes that we are coming in touch with Krishna. We basically are coming in touch with Krishna through these four different prominent mellows. And when we come in touch with Krishna through these prominent mellows, there is a specific taste. Just as the taste of the mango has certain rasas, it is very specific, it has very specific tones, it has a very specific texture. Similarly, the four mellows have their own specific texture, taste, etc. So we call it rasa. Yeah, that's the whole origin of the word rasa. Now, because he is the origin of all rasas, he is Akila Rasamrita Sindhu. He is an ocean of rasa. This particular four broad categories of relationships that can be had in Raj, they encompass every other relationship in different Vaikuntha lokas. This is very important. The Sakya, the sense of being fraternal. Yeah, Sakya is all about fraternal love. It's fraternity. It has to do a lot about being a friend and also being a brother, the sense that friends, close friends, basically call themselves, feel a certain sense of brotherhood. And in that particular sense, I'm just giving you an example. In Lord Ram's appearance, Lakshman felt a certain lack in this rasa because there was too much formality in Ayodhya, because Lord Ram was a king. That formality is completely extinguished when it comes to the position of Raja, where Balaram and Krishna and his close friends, they enjoy a fraternal relationship which is called Vishramba, where there's equality. Without this equality, the ingredient of equality, the rasa of friendship would become formal. Friends means they're equal. You can't call someone a friend without being equal. You can't really call someone a friend without being equal. You need to be very careful about calling someone a friend, and you need to be able to accord equal rights to the person. You need to be able to accord equal rights to the person. This is very important, Vishramba. So in Vrindavan, a sense of friendship, it includes, it is actually pure friendship. There really isn't any impersonal attitude. There really isn't any kind of Aishwarya where there's a certain sense of distance between the two friends. There isn't. It's pure friendship. So in Vrindavan, the relationship between Krishna and his greatest devotee, Srimati Radharani, is Madhurya Ras. That Madhurya Ras is said to be all-inclusive of every other type of ras which is there in the whole of existence. As a consequence, the specific relationship that is being had by Krishna with his devotees in Vrindavan and his personality in Vrindavan is the subject matter of Srimad Bhagavatam, and that falls in the category of samam bonum and absolute truth, because everything else is a little less. If you go to a Vaikuntha planet, the Lord sits on a throne, you can't approach the Lord. You go to Dwaraka, Krishna is royalty, Balaram is royalty. There's a certain formality to approach them. In Vrindavan, the devotees of the Lord, they treat them as equals. So there's an ingredient which is here, which is sweetness, where it kind of overpowers all kinds of formalities. And as a consequence, the pure relationship of Vrindavan is the origin of every other relationship between God and his servants, and God and the soul, Jiva, between Paramatma and Jiva. Every other relationship is encompassed and contained within relationships in Vrindavan. This is very important for us to understand as to why Srimad Bhagavatam is so special, is because in Bhagavatam, we literally are touching upon the topic of samabonam. We are talking about the absolute consideration. We are not talking about something which is yet to be seen beyond Vrindavan. There isn't one. This is where Krishna practically removes all kinds of formalities, and the love here between him and his devotees is pure, because there really isn't any kind of Aishwarya. There isn't a formality. He is not even considered God. He is not even considered God. They love him just as he's supposed to be loved, as Krishna. So the point we're just trying to make here is that this is the subject matter of Srimad Bhagavatam. That is the reason why Srimad Bhagavatam is the essence of all the Vedanta Sutras, because it captures the entire purpose of the Vedanta Sutras, which is to fall in love with God. You cannot, basically to develop a relationship with God. If you want to serve him, which is Abhideya, you need a relationship, and that relationship is to be based on love, anukulyasya. Yeah, we say that, pratikul and anukul. What does it mean? It basically is love. It is basically what is seen in Vrindavan. This is the absolute platform of love. This is the absolute consideration. Everything has its origin in Vrindavan. That is the reason why Srimad Bhagavatam is considered the peak contribution of Srila Vyasadeva, is because it deals with the subject matter of the origin of everything. And there are two sides to it. One is Krishna is the source of all avatars. The other side to it is the source of all rasa. So all rasas are all found in Vrindavan. This is exactly where the origin of rasa is. Once you move away from Vrindavan, the Lord is worshipped with formality. So there's formality, or rather the relationship between eternal Goloka Vrindavan versus Ayodhya. There is Mother Devaki in Mathura. There's Mother Devaki in Dwaraka. Mother Devaki cannot deal with Krishna and Balaram as Mother Yashoda would deal with in Braj. She cannot, because she has seen Krishna in the four-armed form as God. Mother Yashoda does not believe that her son is God. Nanda Maharaj does not believe that his son is God. He sees him as a son. There's absolutely no consideration here of interference, even of any kind of formality, any kind of Aishwarya. So the love here and the interaction between the Jiva and Krishna, which is Paramatma, is the origin of every other type of relationship that you can find in every other Vaikuntha planets. And as a consequence, this is called the absolute consideration. So when you're studying and talking about the absolute truth, it means Krishna and Vrindavan. That is the topic of Srimad Bhagavatam. It means the origin of Krishna's activity, the explanation and elaboration of the activities of the Lord in Vrindavan. So one needs to understand the difference between this and being God. If you want to study the activities of the Lord in formality in a Vaikuntha planet where he is lying on, Sesha, he is four-armed, he has Mother Lakshmi serving his lotus feet at all times, then all the devas, they can't even see him in the Shir Sagar. Yeah, they can't even see him. Our notion where people can easily travel is not true. They stand at the edge of the Shir Sagar. They stand at the edge of this particular outpost in the material world, and they're offering prayers. They're offering the Purusha Shukta prayers to glorify Krishna, the Lord, as he lies on the ocean of milk, Shir Sagar. They offer him Purusha Shukta prayers to glorify him. Yeah, the point I'm trying to make is the devas don't get to even see Krishna. They do not get to see Krishna. They don't get to see Vishnu. It is not possible unless he decides to appear in front of them. The point we are trying to make is that this is the absolute consideration. The topic of Srimad Bhagavatam has to deal with the absolute consideration. It has to deal with the samam bonam. It has to deal with the origin of everything in two different ways. You can understand it, the origin of everything from the perspective of Krishna being the source of all avatars, and the origin of everything from the perspective of relationships. All the rasa flows from Vrindavan. It gets more and more formal, complicated as it flows down, but then all the rasa starts with Sri Vrindavan Dham. So the point which I'm just trying to make here is that the Bhagavatam is so special. And when we use the word Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, we're talking about the Vasudev platform. And when we talk about the platform, Vasudev platform, the understanding of the Vasudev platform, we're talking about understanding God in the absolute sense. Understanding God in the absolute sense. Understanding God in the absolute sense means understanding Him in a manner which allows us to encompass in that understanding every form of relationship that He has. It allows us to encompass all the different avatars. So we have a very clear understanding. In reality, once you come to Krishna consciousness, you will understand Shiva Tattva much better. We will understand who is Lord Shiva, we will understand his role, we would understand what he does exactly and what is his relationship. We will understand the relationship between the different Vishnu avatars and their devotees. Krishna consciousness, if you literally study it, and if you've been in other schools of philosophy, when you come to Krishna consciousness, it is fascinating because the clarity available here is unprecedented. And this is not because I am a subscriber to this particular philosophy. It is more so because it's the truth. You can practically understand everything if you come to Krishna consciousness. And we can understand it in the manner in which it is supposed to be understood. And there would be no confusion, there would be no disrespect. There would be complete understanding. This is basically because we're dealing with the Vasudeva platform. It is because our teachings of the Acharyas have their origin in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Every book written by our predecessor Acharyas has its origin in the Srimad Bhagavatam. It is not independent of the views of Srimad Bhagavatam. It is basically experiences of Srimad Bhagavatam. When they live Srimad Bhagavatam, they experience Srimad Bhagavatam, their realizations get compiled into Shastra. That is what we read. That is what we read. That is our reading. That is what we read. The realizations of Srila Rupa, the realizations of the other Goswamis, all of these they have their origin in the Srimad Bhagavatam. They have their origin in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And Srimad Bhagavatam is Krishna himself. Srimad Bhagavatam contains all rasas. It contains all the different complexity of relationships. As you go through the different cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam, we get to understand the dynamics of relationship between Krishna and his different avatars. We understand the complexity, or rather the dynamics of the appearance of the Lord in different ways, because the devotee has aspirations in their heart. What is our aspiration? Our aspiration has been defined by Srila Rupa Goswami. Yeah? Anya bilashita shunyam, jnana karmadi anuvratam, anukulyena Krishna anushilanam, bhakti uttama. This has been defined by Srila Rupa Goswami. This is our aspiration. But in the Srimad Bhagavatam, you have devotees with other aspirations too. So you need to learn the dynamics of what is the aspiration which a devotee has, and then you find that Krishna appears as an avatar to satisfy that aspiration, but he disappears after the fact. Yeah? So where the aspiration has even greater presence in the mind of the devotee than Krishna himself. Yeah? You have an even greater presence of what is to be achieved by prayers than the Lord who appears to grant those prayers. So once the prayers are granted, the Lord disappears. You will see this in Srimad Bhagavatam. You will see the interaction of sages with different kinds of people. They interact based on authority to understand. You will see this very clearly. You will see how Sri Narad Muni interacts with different personalities. He doesn't interact always saying, this is what it is. You need to do this. He doesn't give the same answer to all people. He looks at the circumstance, he looks at this person and says, this is what you're capable of now, this is what you should focus on, because that's your path. So I will give you and ask you questions, etc., based on that. If you study Srimad Bhagavatam closely, these different flavors would come out quite alive. It would become revealed as to what the different interactions are. Every verse is important because these interactions give us an idea about the different flavors available in different Vaikuntha planets. Then we reach the 10th canto, which is a Samam Bonam, where we study about the absolute consideration. If you do not know the relative consideration, if you do not know Krishna in his other avatars, it would be difficult to understand Krishna as Samam Bonam. How will you understand this boy who is being described as being two-armed, who steals, who does all kinds of atrocious things? How would you understand him in the 10th canto if you did not know how this wonderful, wonderful episode in the 10th canto is basically arrived at after seeing his interaction in different formal levels based on the desire of the devotees? The first 9 cantos are training us to bring us to the 10th canto, which is the reason why going to the 10th canto is bewildering, because he is two-armed and he acts like a human being and he does things which normally are not considered to be wonderful. Yes, stealing and all these things. Stealing is a transcendental habit. It is glorified. Why is it glorified? Is because by the time you reach the 10th canto, you would have understood that his stealing is transcendental just as much as he is transcendental. Janma karma chame divyam. Yeah, he says that in 4.9. He also says very clearly that you have to understand me through the absolute consideration. Otherwise, you won't be able to come to me. You cannot come to me unless you experience me. Experiencing him requires faith. When you do not have direct experience, you need faith first. You need to begin with faith, then you need to practice with faith, then faith results in experiences, and then experiences increase the quantity and the quality of faith. Ultimately, then we reach a point where faith doesn't matter because there's direct interaction with the Lord. This happens at the advanced platforms of Bhava and Prema. So the point which we're trying to make here is that we need to understand that we are approaching the absolute truth in Srimad Bhagavatam. This is absolute. We use the word absolute truth, we use the word absolute consideration, we use the word samam bonam. This is why it's used. It is used because we can't use the word God to describe Krishna. He is the absolute truth. God can be a creator, maintainer, destroyer. He can have different functions. But he has an origin, right? In one sense. He has an origin. What is the origin of God? There is an origin. So if you keep digging on what is the origin, Scripture says Krishna is the origin. The rasas of Vrindavan encompass. When they descend from the Vaikuntha planets right down to the material universe, the rasas become perverted. Yes, there's a consideration of perversion when it touches material shores. Absolutely. But the rasas are descending from Goloka and they descend onto the material planets and they become perverted. People misunderstand what it is. But in reality, the rasas of Vrindavan are the origin of the rasas of the rest of the world. This is basically the fundamental definition of being absolute. There's no other origin. It is absolute. There is no such thing as this being relative to something. You can't compare the rasa of Vrindavan with anything else because this is the absolute. You cannot compare the activities of Krishna here in Vrindavan with anywhere else. He is absolute. He is the origin. Now we come and approach this Krishna in the 10th canto on a step-by-step basis. And that is actually being understood. So when we chant Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, when we chant this particular mantra, we are addressing Krishna as the son of Vasudeva. We are also addressing Krishna as an understanding that he is the absolute truth. This is the reason. Because we are approaching him as the samam bonam, as the absolute truth. This is the absolute consideration. Yeah? So this is very important for us to have this understanding. This is spoken of, if you hear the first class I gave after I started these sessions on Srimad Bhagavatam, I have spoken about the absolute consideration. I've given you more time, I've given some more information. But today I wanted to start on this in the second canto. This is also the beginning of the first canto, so it kind of fit in with what I wanted to speak on. This is the first verse of the second canto. We never hear Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, the invocation. The invocation itself starts with Sukadev Goswami calling upon and saying, I'm going to speak about the absolute truth. I'm going to talk about the absolute consideration. That is being spoken of here. So when we say that someone has transcended and has an understanding of Krishna, and they're able to interact with Krishna, a premi bhakta, a bhakta who is premi, who has fallen in love with Krishna, who has Krishna prema, then such a devotee is on the Vasudeva platform. There really isn't any confusion for him to understand different material phenomena. There isn't. So we have to have this understanding that Bhagavatam is special because you're talking about the absolute consideration. The absolute consideration means Krishna is the origin of all avatars. Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. And it is also true that his interactions with the devotees of Vrindavan is the origin of all rasas, all relationships emanating. He's Akila Rasamrita Sindhu. He's basically an ocean of rasa. And this is basically the consideration as well. So these are 2 points we wanted to make about Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. O my Lord, the all-pervading personality of Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. Vasudevaya, unto Lord Krishna, the son of Vasudeva. Text 1, Sri Shukho Vacha. Now this is text 1 of the second canto. The first part was the invocation verse. Varyanesha te pascha krito loka hitam nripa atmavat sammataha pumsam shrotavyadishu yah paraha. Yah paraha. Sri Sukadev Goswami said, my dear king, your question is glorious because it's very beneficial to all kinds of people. The answer to this question is the prime subject matter for hearing, and it is approved by all transcendentalists. Now, what is the question which Parikshit Maharaj asked about? Yeah, one moment. Just one moment, please. Let's go to the last question. So what is the question? The question itself is asked by Parikshit Maharaj. Please let me know what a man should hear, chant, remember, and worship, and also what he should not do. Please explain all of this to me. This is the question. Now, this question is being addressed by Sukadev Goswami, and he is basically glorifying the question. He is glorifying the question. What is it that we spoke of in the previous class? We spoke of the fact that the same question was asked of Sutta Goswami by the sages in Naimisharanya. We said that. The sages of Naimisharanya asked the same question of Sutta Goswami. So at the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, Sutta Goswami sits with the Brahmanas and the sages of Naimisharanya. They are giving him, they're posing questions and they're asking for clarifications on those questions. And then in the beginning, Sutta Goswami is also one of the audience of Sukadev Goswami's group when he was addressing Parikshit Maharaj. And now Parikshit Maharaj, in the end of this canto, first canto, he is asking about the same, he has the same question. What is it? Your question is glorious because it's very beneficial. He's basically saying, what is it a man should chant? What should he do? Because Kali is upon the population. This was the question of the Brahmanas to Sutta Goswami. Parikshit Maharaj wants to know what is it someone is supposed to do, because he does not have a commodity at that point in time which is very dear to everyone. Why is Parikshit Maharaj asking this question? What should a man chant? What should he do? Why is he asking this question? It is not that he never came in touch with a sage. It is not that he was in touch with scripture. It is not that he was a practicing Vaishnava. Why is he asking this question? He is asking this question because he has realization, he has direct perception that in 7 days he's going to die. If you know that you're going to leave your body in 7 days, you really want to know what to do with your time. So it is prudent that you don't make assumptions based on the past. You just don't make assumptions based on the past. Even though he might have read the scripture, even though he might have had other sages talk to him, etc., etc., Parikshit Maharaj is asking Sukadev Goswami, what should I do? Because he doesn't have time. He doesn't want to spend his time and waste the time that he has, which is 7 days, 1 week. This is the proper attitude for a devotee. We constantly need to take inventory of our circumstance. We need to constantly fit in with Krishna's words of Manmanabha Madbhakto Madhyajivam Maskuru. We need to constantly meditate on Sarvadharman Parityaja Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. We need to understand and reprioritize our priorities based on the identities we have already established in the world and the identities we seek to establish in the future. So we need to be very careful. We don't want to jump to conclusions that what we already know is working for us. So as a consequence, we basically need to find out and introspect and agitate the mind to see if we're using our time properly. The good fortune is Srila Prabhupada and his servants are available through scripture and through direct service. Some of Srila Prabhupada's servants are still on the planet, and as a consequence, respective spiritual masters, you can approach the spiritual master and find out what is it that you ought to do. In most part, the spiritual master has already instructed us. When the point of initiation, our entire journey began, and when our journey begins at the point of initiation, they are giving us beads and they're telling us that you must chant X number of rounds, you must follow the principles, and you must worship such and such deity as you progress to the second initiation. The point which I'm trying to make is we already have been instructed by the spiritual master. There is no need for us to go and ask again, but we need to question ourselves at all times to see if we are really prioritizing the fact of being a servant of Krishna. The problem which we face is, unfortunately or fortunately, we just do not know when we are going to die. If we knew when we are going to leave our bodies, perhaps a greater level of planning could be done, like Parikshit Maharaj. He practically resolved to come and then surrender to Sukadev Goswami. He surrendered to his circumstances. Trinadapi Sunichena, Taroriva Sahishnuna. He surrendered. He accepted the circumstance that he was going to die in a week's time. Then he started asking this question, what should I do with my time? He immediately, because he was very sincere, Krishna sent Sukadev Goswami, who never would have gone there except the fact that now he has to, basically, give Srimad Bhagavatam to the world. So Parikshit Maharaj is being very sincere. Now, we don't know when we're going to leave our bodies. As a consequence, we tend to focus on identities which are secondary. And secondary identities bring about secondary dharma. There is primary dharma and dharma which is in our relationship to Krishna. There is secondary dharma which is based on the other identities we have established in this world. Because we do not know when we are going to die, we keep watering the other identities quite powerfully. We basically water the identities very powerfully because we just do not know when we are going to leave our bodies. We just do not know. There's a lack of information, so to speak. Parikshit Maharaj was fortunate to know. But what we should do is to follow in his footsteps. We should reprioritize periodically. We should look for things that are hindrances in our life which are taking away time, and we need to work towards resolving those or ensuring that it doesn't encroach upon our time where we can offer our service to Krishna. This is very important because this whole business of sadhana bhakti is about watering and reinforcing the identity of being Krishna's servant. And in the process of sadhana bhakti, as we are watering and reinforcing the identity of being Krishna's servant, we have an understanding that it requires surrender. We have an understanding that we first need to fall in love. What does it mean? What does it mean It means real service, and real bhakti starts after bhava. That's what it means. The advanced stage of loving emotions has to precede proper surrender, has to precede proper service. If one does not have proper sambandha, how will they engage in abhideya and how will they attain prayojana? There really isn't a matter of us being able to serve. If a manager in an organization does not understand his role, how will he or she understand what they're supposed to do? If they don't understand their duties in terms of the relationship with the organization and with the people whom they are corresponding and working with, if they don't understand who is superior, who is basically their subordinate, they don't understand all the sambandha which is involved in that organization, in that particular level, in that particular role, how will they perform their duties? It's just common sense. Consider that in a very practical sense. How will someone perform their duty when they're not clear of what the relationship is with the organization they belong to, with their boss, and with their subordinates? So how can we expect to be proper servants when our sambandha with Krishna is not clear? It is not clear. What do we know now is what the spiritual master has given us, saying, you're Krishna Das, you're Krishna Dasi. We are working on it. But we really do not know what is our sambandha yet. When that sambandha is known, then that's a different story. As we advance in Krishna consciousness, we advance and we basically have progressed from anartha nivritti. We have basically progressed and we have concluded our anarthas. Anarthas essentially means we are watering the other identities in our life quite vigorously, whilst not being able to understand that they have to be subservient to the identity of being Krishna's servants. That is anartha. What does an anartha mean? Anartha means that which has no meaning with the relationship of Krishna. So when those desires are being removed, it becomes clear to us that this is a sambandha with Krishna. First, the relationship is established. Sambandha is established. Sambandha gyan is being given. When the sambandha gyan is received, then one has the ability to engage in abhideya, which is activity in that service. Yeah? But how can service be wonderful? Service cannot be wonderful unless there is surrender. Surrender can't happen unless there is love. Love starts in bhava. So can you imagine how far we are from proper service? We are miles away from proper service. We are miles away from proper service. Because we do not even know our relationship with Krishna. How can we serve him? We don't love him. How can we serve him? We don't love him, so how do we surrender? Can we go and say, Krishna? Can you go to the altar and say, Krishna, do what is necessary. I have tried my best. I have not been very successful until today in being able to successfully get rid of all the anarthas that I have. Do what is necessary for me to be a better servant. Can we really go and say that before Krishna? We would feel quite vulnerable. We would feel afraid. We would not know what Krishna would do to us. What if Krishna takes this away from us? What if Krishna makes this change to our lives? And what if the change is unpalatable? What if it's hurtful? What if, it becomes problematic for us? So we are afraid of Krishna. So when there's so much fear of the Lord, how is it possible to love him? Because you can't be afraid of someone and also love them. You can't. It doesn't work. Yeah, it's a misconception that you can be afraid of someone and you can still love them. You can't be. There is no such thing as fear and love coexisting. It cannot exist together. It is not meant to exist together. You can either be in love or you can be in fear. We are in fear for most part, and that's the reason why we don't surrender. One may claim that they don't know how to surrender, but in reality, we don't surrender because we are in fear. We don't have the desperation of being able to go and say, Krishna, do whatever is necessary so that I can come closer. There's so much clutter on my table. Remove all the clutter so that I can focus on the service that is required. We don't have the ability to move forward with such determination. And as a consequence, we struggle because our priorities are being taken away from different angles by the different identities that we've established. So what is it which is to be done to resolve this? The resolution has to begin by desiring first, of wanting and desiring very actively, of wanting to participate in prema. Desiring the outcome of Krishna consciousness, which is prema, the goal of Krishna consciousness is Krishna prema, is absolutely required. Desire is required. The first step is desire. How do we get desires? We get desires when we come in touch with those who are already in prema. So when we come in touch with sadhus, then we have the ability to get some of the, I would say, the mood and their particular internal consciousness by serving them. That is why Krishna says, you have to understand me through tattva. He says this, Janma karma chame divyam yom vetti tattvataha. Then in 4.34, he says, approach a spiritual master who is a tattvadarshinaha. How do you approach the spiritual master? You approach the spiritual master through service. Pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. You have to approach someone who is a tattvadarshi. Someone who is a tattvadarshi, tattva means absolute consideration. Someone who has experienced the truth through his own practice, whose faith is basically so wonderfully established because they have had experiences. Because they have chanted Shuddhanam, they know what is Nam. Then they are very eager to distribute that Nam. Yeah? Aindra Prabhu used to say that if you are in Namaparad and you do kirtan on the roads, you're distributing Namaparad. If you are in Namabas and you do kirtan in the road, you're distributing Namabas. If you are chanting Shuddhanam, Premanam, then you're distributing Shuddhanam, Premanam. What does it mean? It essentially means that what we carry is what we can give. How can you give something that you don't have? So the first point that we want to make is that we want to first accumulate before we want to distribute. And that requires having a singular focus. That requires desiring. That requires a proper desire. Throughout Srimad Bhagavatam, we see the fact that when there's great determination and desire, arrangements are made where people come in touch with profound sources of mercy and inspiration. You see it in the case of Dhruva. Dhruva was extraordinarily determined for a 5-year-old child, and he practically set out wanting to chant with determination. The moment he set out wanting to basically attain Krishna with determination, the spiritual master of the caliber of Sri Narad Muni arrives. So there's association, there's protection, there's inspiration. All kinds of resources come upon the devotee who is determined. All kinds of resources come upon the devotee whose desires are extremely fixed in being able to attain the goal. For us to attain the goal, that goal needs to be singularly placed in front of your eyes. We need to think about it on a daily basis. What is my contribution today for me to attain prema? Because without prema, you can't surrender. Until then, there's fear. In prema, one realizes Krishna loves them far beyond their comprehension. Then there's surrender, because you surrender to the beloved. You have complete trust and you surrender to the beloved. You allow the beloved to do whatever they want with you because you love them. You're submitting yourself. Then there can be service because you're also submitting yourself to ensure that they are happy. This is very, very, very important for us to understand that this work has to be done. This work has to be done. This work has to be done on a daily basis where we constantly meditate and take upon ourselves what is required. We constantly look at and take inventory of our lives. What is it that we are inadvertently adding on? This place is a dangerous place. The material world is dangerous. If you are in the West, it's even more dangerous. How do we protect ourselves when we are in the West? If you live in the West, there has to be a lot of service. If you do not do service in the West, there will be no purification of the senses. If the senses are not purified, the senses would come in touch with the objects of the senses, and then the whole cycle would begin. The Srimad Bhagavatam is very clear. Yeah, there's the objects of the senses, then there are the working senses, then there are the senses, knowledge-gathering senses, and all of these combined with density, combined with destiny, combined with the environment, combined with fate. There are so many different things which all go into forming what we have to be in the next life. It all starts with the senses. If the senses are not pure, then we are practically ordering on a platter how we are going to experience the next lifetime. That's why in the West, there has to be a lot of service. In a place like Vrindavan, Mayapur, one can quietly sit, read, and chant because you are in an environment which is completely spiritually surcharged. In the West, you are in an environment which is filled with sense gratification. It doesn't mean that you can relax in Vrindavan. You need very heavy sadhana schedules and reading because in Vrindavan, the spiritual energy is very dynamic and you need basically to constantly be able to use the resources that have been provided to make advancement. Yeah. So as a consequence, the point I'm trying to make is that this requires a lot of thinking. Parikshit Maharaj was fortunate enough to know that he's going to leave in a week's time. And as a consequence, he sat down and he strategized and said, I've got to put all the rubbish out. So he got rid of all his identities. He went to the forest. He was so fortunate and he was so determined, he was so blessed that Krishna sent Sukadev Goswami. Sukadev Goswami starts Bhagavatam. But what does Parikshit Maharaj do? He does not assume anything. He does not assume anything. He basically does not assume that I know this and I know that and I have known this and I have known that. He is practically presenting himself as a raw candidate. He is saying that you should speak to me. What should I do? What should I chant? What should I do? What should be my action? He's practically wanting to hear from Sukadev Goswami as if he's just starting out for the first time. It is not because he didn't know. He knew that even if he knew, this was dangerous for him to make assumptions because there wasn't much time. It's better for him to be guided profoundly by Sukadev Goswami. Okay? So now we looked at two different verses. Text 1, Sukadev Goswami says, my dear king, your question is glorious because it is very beneficial to all kinds of people. So it was not only that. Parikshit Maharaj was a king. He was in charge. He was the emperor. As a consequence, he had responsibility for the population. So he was asking a question which would be relevant for the population. So, my dear king, your question is glorious because it's very beneficial to all kinds of people, all varnas, all ashrams, all states of consciousness. The answer to this question is the prime subject matter for hearing, and it is approved by all transcendentalists. Yeah? So we'll study the answer in the subsequent week, but I wanted to basically blend in the first canto. The first canto's introduction talks about, the Bhagavatam's introduction talks about the absolute consideration. This verse of Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya is the Vasudeva platform. It talks about the absolute consideration. And then we also are getting into the subject matter, which is of great relevance. So we understand that to serve, one needs to surrender. And to surrender, one needs to be in love. So real service begins when one attains the higher platforms of bhava and prema. So that's where we are going. So I just want to stop here and I want to see if you have any comments or questions for today's session.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Yes, so a little bit not clear that we seem to be going in a circle which says, first of all, love Krishna, surrender, and then do service. And then the other hand, you're saying like in the West, you have to do a lot of service. So we're starting from the third step.
Okay, so we are starting from the step of being Krishna Das and Krishna Dasi. But it doesn't quite mean that we're doing exactly what Krishna wants us to do in terms of proper service. So we are slowly getting to walk into the platform of proper service. So we need to begin somewhere. That's the point we're trying to make here. We need to begin as Krishna Das and Krishna Dasi. We do not know who we are in Krishna's kingdom. We don't have a relationship with him where we would really say, this is my service. We really aren't in a situation where we would say that we have fallen in love. We can't really claim that we are completely surrendered. We don't have any of that. How do you attain that? You attain that by ensuring that you engage in sadhana bhakti. Sadhana is being forced. That's the difference between sadhana bhakti versus raganuga. The two different platforms are the sadhana bhakti is that which is being forced upon us because we want to purify ourselves so that we could engage in proper service, we could position ourselves for proper love, etc. So it's a combination. So the point is that at this level of being Krishna Das and Krishna Dasi, our service is not complete because we don't know who we are. But as we progress and we contribute to this service, and we also engage in sadhana, which is also service, which is basically chanting is also service, we slowly, steadily would reach the platform of establishing ourselves in one singular identity of being Krishna's servant. And then slowly, steadily, we would develop emotions of love that would allow us to have confidence to surrender. Then real service in a very profound way would begin. That is what I meant. But I understand your confusion as well.
Okay, thank you. So it's like two different types of service in a sense. Almost.
Yes, because my spiritual master used to say this. I can give you an example. He used to say that sometimes when the spiritual master comes, we could have possibly gone and bought all kinds of wonderful ingredients for making wonderful kheer, milk kheer. So we could have gone and bought wonderful nuts. We could have bought very good quality milk. We could have done all of this. We could have spent a lot of time preparing the kheer. We could offer it to Krishna, we keep it ready. Now the spiritual master comes to our house because he's the representative of Krishna, and we want to basically serve him kheer because that's why we made it. But the spiritual master is sitting down, and then he says, "Can I have a cup of water?" But then we say, "I can give you a cup of kheer." He says, "I want water." But then we say, "I worked so hard, I made a cup of kheer." He says, "I'm thirsty, give me water." We can't hear that. I made kheer, have a cup of kheer instead. So that's the difference between understanding what Krishna wants versus what we are offering in the present. In the present, a lot of offerings that we do make have a lot to do with what we want to do. But real service and love would begin when we understand what Krishna wants us to do. And that happens with love. And then we would start serving him the way he wants us to. That's the difference, just to give you a little, I would say not, somewhat of a more simplistic example.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Sure. Hare Krishna. Any other question or comment?
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Haribol.
Yeah. When it comes to loving the other person before we serve, normally, even though we have differences with someone, but actually when you know about him completely, that is where we start loving him. So that sambandha will be created once we know what exactly he is thinking about me as well. So in
Sambandha. Sorry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, sambandha we can understand more when we understand that person, like how he thinks about me as well. So sometimes we have a difference with some people, but when I know that, okay, he's actually thinking about my growth or my spiritual elevation, that is where my relationships start building with them more clearly.
Yes.
So in Bhagavatam now, like we understand about Krishna by reading through philosophy, which is not given directly, but we need to derive more information. But is there any particular section, Prabhu, like where we understand about Krishna's affection towards the spiritual, towards the souls? That's it.
Sure.
Like,
see, two points I want to make is that when we use the word sambandha, relationship, it is all inclusive. It includes who we are in the spiritual sky. It includes knowledge about Krishna. It includes knowledge about the relationship between us and Krishna. It includes knowledge about the surroundings of Krishna. In fact, the spiritual world, we go on to receive and actually have direct experience of knowing who we are in the spiritual sky as we advance. And this is at advanced stages. It is not to be minimized by discussion, which is, in a casual way, but it is basically the ultimate goal is to know who we are in the spiritual sky. And who is Krishna, so we are able to serve him in a very effective way. Now, the point we want to make is your question as to, is there a possibility for us to know if Krishna is loving us and what arrangements he has made for us? The presence of so many different great personalities who come on the planet, even though they have no necessity to be here, is itself an indication of love that Krishna has for us. Study Srila Prabhupada's life, and we will find that what is the necessity for a 70-year-old man to travel with his, with his books to the West and to distribute the books and live in conditions which are horrible for someone as cultured as he was from Vrindavan. Imagine at 70 for an advanced soul to travel by ship and go to the Western shores, share the same apartment with people who basically did not have any appreciation for his stature. Culturally, they were not bad, but they just couldn't adjust to him. They didn't know who he was. The point I'm trying to make is, when Krishna makes such enormous arrangements for us, that itself is a sign that Krishna loves us. And you see this practically in the lives of so many different saintly personalities who don't need to be here, but they go through such trouble. And they do it because this is their motivation. This is basically how they are serving their Lord. This is their motivation for Krishna. This is their Krishna consciousness. Their Krishna consciousness basically allows them to extend themselves. Now, in the Srimad Bhagavatam as well, you would notice in the different manifestations of avatars that they come when devotees basically are seeking their assistance. So you find, for example, Lord Narasimha, which is an extraordinarily powerful example for us, simply because the Lord appeared for the chanter of the holy name. Someone was sincerely wanting to chant the Lord's name, and the Lord appears. Yeah, this is basically to facilitate the chanting, to remove the obstacle, and to ensure that the devotee is not disturbed. Lord Narasimha appears. So the point I'm trying to make is, the Bhagavatam is full of examples of extraordinary arrangements, changes, and opportunities that are being allowed for the purpose of the devotee to move forward. You also see this by the examples of our predecessors who went through such struggles just so that we could do what we are doing today comfortably. Yeah? So it's quite an extraordinary experience. So I just want to say that when you are chanting the holy names in itself is the biggest service that you could perform. Yeah. To know and understand the experiences that we may have in spirituality, you need to come in touch with Srimad Bhagavatam. Then we would know that it was said in Srimad Bhagavatam and I'm experiencing it. We have a benchmark. We have to come in touch with Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Bhagavad Gita, etc. So we are reading scripture to prepare ourselves for experience. We are reading scripture to prepare ourselves for experiences, and we chant, which is our greatest service. When we are chanting Harinam and we are engaging in interacting with the community of devotees, and we're coming in touch with scripture, we're coming in touch with the Dham, we have many, many experiences of coming in touch with Krishna himself. These reinforce our faith. And as faith gets reinforced slowly, steadily, our experiences and the eagerness to advance becomes more and more. So we notice this. There's someone who basically starts out in Krishna consciousness versus someone who has spent years and years and years doing very, very difficult service. Now, I was talking about Mother Hladini, and I want to just make this mention again. I forgot to give the full example, and I might have spoken about it before. She was serving in New Vrindavan, and she was basically the only pujari, and she was practically whole day of service. But she was so extraordinary in her pujari service and so extraordinary in her dedication to the words of Srila Prabhupada and the teachings, then she had such enormous, I would say, faith that she endeavored alone in serving the deities. And during the day, sometimes, she basically used to facilitate that identity in a different way. I would request everyone to think about it. She used to keep open books of verses in different parts of the temple. So, for example, in the kitchen, if there's a shelf where she would keep an open Chaitanya Charitamrita, she would keep an open Srimad Bhagavatam, open Bhagavad Gita. When the milk is boiling, she would read a couple of verses here. When she has to basically, wait for the deities to honor, for accept the bhoga, then she would read a few verses here and there. So she used to strategically plant scripture here and there, and she never used to waste her time because she used to use this time, the lead time, I would say, time which can't be really used. She used to use it very, very clearly for this purpose. Now the point is, There used to be days when she can't chant. She used to hang the beads in front of her and literally count 16 rounds while cutting vegetables, while doing so many things. That was the control that she had over her mind. She could literally maintain peace, kind of pace. She could maintain pace by even hanging the beads in front of her and counting, and then she could do it. The point I'm trying to make is, when someone is very determined to be in touch and wanting to make advancement and wanting to basically move forward, they can find a way to do it. This was a wonderful example of someone keeping open books here and there, having service from 2 o'clock in the morning till night, 10 o'clock, and being able to do it. Then the sambandha grows because you're constantly in touch with Krishna's deities, constantly in touch with Krishna as Bhagavatam, constantly in touch with Krishna through chanting. Then the service improves as we understand Krishna. And then finally, the time comes when we have no other aspiration other than wanting to serve him. Then we are ready for being receivers of loving emotions. That is bhava. Yeah, we start understanding who we are, etc. Yeah, this happens after anartha nivritti. It's quite fast, but until anartha nivritti, one has to engage in service to purify their senses. The purpose of engaging in service before anartha nivritti and during anartha nivritti is to purify our senses. The purpose of service after the fact is to please the senses of Krishna. Yeah, so we are pleasing the senses of Krishna by engaging in service, but we're also purifying our senses before. After the fact, it is to please the senses of Krishna because the senses are already purified. Then we will know how to please him. We would know by instinct that this is what he wants. This is the best way to serve. So I hope this was an elaborate explanation to your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Anything else? Okay, so we'll end the session and we'll meet again next week. We are now in the second canto. If you could read and come, then you would be able to participate. Read the first canto as well and the second canto. This would really help you participate, and it would be very encouraging if everybody participates as well. Okay? So thank you very much. We'll meet again the following week. Hare Krishna.